Welcome to the Motivational Midwife. My name's Lynn Jones, and today we're going to look at documentation. So we're going to look this morning at documentation and why it's important, and some of the things that govern us around documentation, because it can be a real hurdle for a lot of people. So when we think about what governs us, well, first of all, we've got the data protection legislation that says, how we can share data and how we store it. Professionally, we've got the NMC Code of Conduct, which tells us what is our duty as a nurse or a midwife or a nursing associate in respect of documentation. We've also got the NMC Standards of Proficiency for Registered Midwives, which reiterates a lot of stuff that's in the code. And there's also the International Confederation of Midwives, which we will briefly look at what they say, and it very much reflects what the NMC says as well. So if we look first of all at what the NMC says, so point 7 is about communicating clearly. So it's important when you are both caring for women and their families, but also with your colleagues, that you use terms that people understand. So you may, when you're writing and discussing with colleagues, you may use more medical and obstetric jargon and words, but not all women will understand those. So you need to make sure that you adapt your language to suit the person you are caring for. But you also need, when you're documenting this, to document professionally in the notes. But if it's the woman's notes and she's going to be able to read those, then it has to be how she can understand it as well. And also you need to document whether you have used interpreting services, and if so, my personal practice is that I put the ID, the name and the ID of the interpreter. They usually have an ID number depending on what company they're working for, but normally when you connect to an interpreting service, they'll say their name and they'll say ID number. So I document the name and number of the interpreter that I have used for that particular consultation. And that very much sits in the 7.2 about meeting people's languages. Be mindful of how your verbal and non-verbal communication as well can come across. Make sure that you've checked that the people in your care or even your colleagues actually understand what it is you're trying to convey. And so again, it's important in your written documentation that you are clear about what it is you are trying to convey. So moving on to the part of the code that's really relevant to this session, and that is our keeping clear and accurate records relevant to our practice. And so what the code says is we need to write those records as soon as possible if we can't actually write them at the time of the event. And whilst I know that best practice is that you're writing directly into, if you have paper notes, the clinical notes, if you have electronic, straight into the electronic notes. Sometimes that's not always possible, particularly if it's an emergency. And whilst we shouldn't be using bits of paper or paper towels, I know that in reality that does happen. And if that does happen, that piece of paper is your contemporaneous record. And so really that should be kept with the woman's notes. Once you've transcribed all the information into your records, you should still keep that piece of paper with the woman's notes, because that is the contemporaneous note, and it's very easy to make errors when you're transcribing, particularly if it's the middle of the night or you're tired. So, really you should keep the contemporaneous record of your events with the notes. When you're documenting, you're highlighting any risks or problems that have arisen and what you've done to deal with them. So that may be referring, it may be escalating to a colleague. It may be a discussion with the woman and her family. Whatever you have done to deal with the problem, you need to be writing clearly exactly what the problem is and what you've done about it, so that the next person taking over care can see what you've done so far, so that will inform them about what they need to do. 10.3 is fairly obvious. You shouldn't really you shouldn't falsify any records. Okay, so, and that should speak for itself, but so that's, don't make things up, don't make observations up because you're too lazy to do them, or, you can't do that. You have to be honest and accurate. And I use observations as an example because when I was a supervisor of midwife, I did have to refer a midwife to the NMC for fraudulent entries of maternal observations. And it came to light because when the woman made a complaint, and when we were talking to her and going through the records and saying, well, the midwife did A, B, and C, she said, no, she didn't. And then when the midwife was challenged about it, she admitted she hadn't actually done them. So, it should speak for itself that you don't make things up that you're putting in notes, but please be honest and accurate. And again, if you find, as I did, that someone has falsified records, then you need to escalate that to the appropriate people. And that will depend on where you are. But often it's your manager, it's your line manager, or the midwife that's in charge on that particular shift. Okay, so attributing any entries you make in any records means that you are signing and dating it and timing the entry that you've made. If there's been a delay in writing in notes, then really you should write written in retrospect. So you write it at the time you're writing it and put the reason as to why there's been a delay in you writing that. Sometimes it is that you have had 2 or 3 women that you're looking after at the same time, and so it's meant that you've not been able to write as contemporaneously as you would have done. Don't use any unnecessary abbreviations or speculation. You can't put your own opinion as to what you think might be the problem. You just have to keep to facts. Okay, abbreviations can mean very different things in very different settings. So, for example, in maternity, we use the abbreviation IUD to be intrauterine death. However, in a gynae situation, that could also refer to intrauterine device, so a contraceptive. So, just be mindful that abbreviations can mean different things to different people. So wherever possible, try and avoid abbreviations. And also, if you've worked in different countries, your abbreviations may mean different things to you than they do in the UK. So if possible, write things in full. Okay, we've got to all make sure that we keep our records securely. So that's if you've got paper records, not leaving them lying around on desks in public areas where people walk past. If you've got electronic records, making sure that you lock the computer screen once you've completed your entries, so that nobody else can can go in on your login, but also anyone passing can't actually access any of the documentation that's on there. And the standards of proficiency, what do they say? Very much the same, keep the records securely, that good records do provide that key aspects of the continuity of care for all the family, that you need to be able to present and share verbal, digital and written reports with either individual people or groups of people. So this may be thinking of things like safeguarding meeting. You will be providing written reports, or you may attend a meeting where you have to share information, but you need to be able to ensure that you respect confidentiality. So you're only sharing where it's appropriate to share. And then also about clearly documenting the woman's understanding, her wishes and her decisions about her care. So in order to do that, you've actually got to have a conversation with her. And so document, the easiest example I can give for that is wishes for labour and birth. Because so when I look after a lady who is coming in labour, I will often say to her, have you written a birth plan? Can I see it? Or what was your wishes for labour and birth? And very often they are very similar for most women. And then I will document in the notes that I've discussed her wishes for labour and birth, and then I will document what those are. So very often, as I say, they're very similar. So it's consent for skin to skin, wishes to breastfeed, consent for intramuscular vitamin K, father to cut the cord after delayed cord clamping, and so on and so forth. So the International Confederation of Midwives, point 1F, says that we need to protect confidentiality of both verbal and written records about the women and the infants, that we maintain our records in a manner required by the health authority. So it will be, again, dependent, because this is an international document, it'll be the health authority within the region or country that you work. Comply with all the local reporting regulations. Again, that will be relevant to the country or region that you're working in, and equally violations of laws, regulations and ethical codes will be relevant to your country of practice. And for all countries and regions, reporting and documenting incidents and adverse outcomes as they're happening, but while you're still providing, if they happen while you're providing care. So why is it important? Well, it is a legal and professional requirement that we give, that we do document. It gives a full picture of the care provided. So good documentation is actually so important for all caregivers involved with that individual's care. Because it tells you what's happened already, what future plans are. If it's a complex case, there'll be management plans within there, and if they're clearly written, then when she comes in to give birth or after she's had her baby, you know exactly what it is you have to do to comply with what that particular woman and baby's individual needs are. It's important in multidisciplinary team working, and also the last one, it is important with respect to litigation. And sadly, we really live in a culture where if it hasn't been written down, it didn't happen. So this is another reason for both the woman's protection, but also your own protection as a midwife, that you clearly document the care you've given, the discussions you've had, and you've made sure that she understands and consents to that care. So different types of documentation. The one that you're more likely to be mostly involved with, obviously, are clinical records, and they may be paper records or notes. They could be electronic, but other types of documentation may be minutes of meetings that you've been involved with, pro formas, so such as some hospitals have pro formas for emergencies such as postpartum hemorrhage or shoulder dystocia. They are still documentation, and they still need to be completed and stored correctly. And any charts, so things like your Myles chart, SBR charts, you may have fetal monitoring charts, CTGs, all of those things, be they paper or electronic, are still types of documentation. So key points, they need to be contemporaneous, they need to be accurate, you must date and time them, and you must sign. And if you are working with a student or a supernumerary midwife, then you should countersign their records. Every entry they make, or certainly if it's electronic, periodically going in and reading what they've written and then making a record yourself that you have read and agreed with all care and documentation by whichever student or supernumerary midwife you're working with. And if they are, particularly if they're paper notes, they need to be legible. But equally with electronic notes, they need to be legible. So you need to be mindful of your spelling, which is not my strong point, I have to say. So, make sure that it actually makes sense and is readable. And there you have it, a brief look at documentation and why it's important. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do so, and I look forward to seeing you next time.